Hi everyone. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for the inevitable banging in the background. Izzy, the cat, has got hold of the top of a bottle and is flinging it against walls, and frankly it's easier just to let her do that and let me make my videos in peace than have to deal with her jumping all over the keyboard. So I'm afraid just ignore any banging in the background. This first video is going to be pretty short. What I'm going to do is introduce the Silk Road, and then I'm going to tell you to go and read the first item that's on your Moodle page, which is Susan Whitfield. It's a chapter from that book, and it is an easy read. So I know you've got a lot of your Millward textbook to read this week, and I'm like, read more, but it's an easy read. I'm also condensing all that we were going to do over 2 classes into one Nearpod and Flipgrid for you, because I know you've got a lot of work going on at the moment. The reason that we were doing Europe and Asia this week is because last week we were looking at Venice, and one of the themes with Venice was its success with long distance trade. So if we look at this map here, very generalization of the Silk Road, if you look far off to the left, well, it's actually got Rome marked, but it should have Venice marked. Venice is up at the top. Byzantium is marked, but you can see how Venice could also serve as a western terminus of the Silk Road. Now, Silk Road is a singular, and that's actually pretty misleading. It should be Silk Roads. It's not like there's an I-55 running from Byzantium in the west all the way to Chang'an in the east. That is not the case. There are multiple Silk Roads. The Silk Road refers to the many different long-distance trade routes that had existed by this point for thousands of years between Europe in the west and Asia in the east. This trade, as this map shows, from a Western perspective, was initially controlled by the Byzantines. It explains why, in part, they were so wealthy. And you can see that this route has it going through the Holy Lands as well. So it also explains a lot of the diversity in the Holy Lands that we've talked about. But at this time period, we're getting to the High Middle Ages. The importance, as we know, of Constantinople and Byzantium is in decline, and Venice is in the ascendance. We're dealing, though, with the Silk Road. You're dealing with a very long time period. This is what we call a macro history. So your readings are coming from much earlier in the Middle Ages and over hundreds of year period. And that's because the Silk Road, this trade route, existed, as I said, for thousands of years. Now, there are many benefits and only really one massive downside to the Silk Road. What the Silk Road provides is increased culture contact and a lot of economic exchange. It allows for knowledge transfer. It also allows for religious transfer. A lot of global religions originate in the Silk Road. As well as goods traveling on the Silk Road, ideas do, and that includes missionaries. There's also just travel. We also have pilgrimage as well. One of the groups we're going to turn to shortly is the Mongols. And the Mongols disrupt the Silk Road to begin with, but then actually really bolster it because they are a political entity that stretches almost the entire length of the Silk Road. So they provide continuity over this vast geographic area. The Pope sends missionaries and diplomats out to deal with the Mongols, but the results of that are pretty debated. But there were ambassadors travelling along the Silk Road as well. So what was the Silk Road, how it worked? You should read Whitfield, okay? This map kind of hints at it, that there's multiple routes, there's multiple different stopping off points. It is not like one person starts off in the far east of China and goes the whole way to Venice or Constantinople in the west. That's not what happens, and Whitfield explains that, and it is the very first link on your Moodle page. So you should definitely go and read that, because you're going to need it for the next link after this slide. It is a route that is dominated by many different groups of traders. There are many stopping off points. There are a multitude of routes, and these are generally done by caravan. So, going safety in numbers is really the answer, because it could be very dangerous. So this picture up here on the top right illustrates that. It's a Chinese illuminated manuscript, and I kept the description of the artwork here, which is pretty grim. The party came across the bodies of their former travelling companions 2 hours later at a narrow defile. They'd been ambushed and killed and all their goods taken. And this means that the Silk Road is treacherous, especially because people are moving very expensive, high-status luxury goods. That is what dominates on the Silk Road. Safety in numbers, like the bottom picture shows here, and also adapted to local conditions. When you hear caravan, you probably do think of camels, but there's also yaks and horses. We have, one of the things we're going to talk about is going to be the exchange of knowledge along the Silk Road. And that's going to be later, and I'm going to particularly talk about technology after we talk about the downside, the disease. But knowledge was also spread along with these luxury trade goods. For example, Whitfield in your reading will explain how prisoners of war taken by Arabs from the Chinese led to the weaving of silk being practiced in the Islamic world, but also the Islamic world gained the knowledge of how to produce paper because of these prisoners of war that they captured. So yeah, not great they prisoners of war, but two very beneficial things, knowledge to the Islamic world came out of that experience. So by the time we're hitting our crusade period, as I said, there's lots of religions present on the Silk Road. There's Christian missionaries going out east, but also Buddhism developed along the Silk Road. And there's a big Islamic role on the Silk Road as well. Islamic expansion, the Arab conquests of the Middle and Near East meant that it was into the area of the Silk Road that a lot of early medieval Islamic expansion occurred to. And lots of people along the Silk Roads converted to Islam. So this gives a sense of unity. Yeah? Religion, as we know, unifies people in the Middle Ages. I mean, it also arguably separates them in the perspective of the Crusades, but, you know, even our Christians see themselves as being Christendom, and while sometimes they're pretty committed to rooting out heretics, sometimes, as we're going to see, they're really not. They're willing to overlook the Christian differences and emphasize instead, well, at least they're Christian. From the Islamic perspective, so much of the western and central parts of the Silk Road being under areas that were conquered by the Arabs and then converted to Islam, gives a sense of unity. But it is, of course, still subject to political changes. So with this little overview, I now want you to go and read Whitfield. You'll need to read Whitfield for your next task, which is a game that's still kind of a prototype. It's kind of choose your own adventure web game. It was created by Dr. Mary Valente of Appalachian State University, and it's about, like, you have to imagine yourself as a merchant along the Silk Road. So you'll need to answer the different questions, and you can see the different experiences you have. But it's still kind of still in development. So you will notice that there are some things that don't happen, which Whitfield talks about. But knowing Whitfield will help you be successful in your career as a merchant on the Silk Road. So I'm going to meet you after that game to talk about the Mongols and the impact that they had on the Silk Road.